For those that aren't familiar with this topic and the debate that surrounds it, the seals refer to something John the Revelator saw in vision when he recorded beginning in Revelation 5. He describes a book, which most believe to be a scroll that has 7 wax seals on it, each sealing a portion of the record. In this vision, John sees that in heaven no one was worthy to open the book until Jesus Christ comes forth to loose the 7 seals. Then one by one, the seals are opened, and we get to see a great deal of imagery and what happens in each of these seals. In Doctrine and Covenants 77, which is a very unique section where Joseph Smith is asking the Lord specific questions and gets direct answers. In verse 6, it says, "What are we to understand by the book which John saw, which was sealed on the back with 7 seals?" The Lord answers, "We are to understand that it contains the revealed will, mysteries, and the works of God, the hidden things of his economy concerning the earth during the 7,000 years of its continuance or its temporal existence." Joseph Smith goes on to ask in verse 7, "What are we to understand by the 7 seals with which it was sealed?" The Lord again answers, quote, "We are to understand that the first seal contains the things of the first 1,000 years, and the second also of the second 1,000 years, and so on until the 7th. So each of these seals holds some special revelation concerning each of the 1,000-year periods of the earth. The first seal holding the things for the first 1,000 years, the second seal for the second 1,000 years, and so forth through the 7th seal. I should point out 2 things here. First, the 1,000-year periods do not align with the dispensations. Second, 7 represents completeness or perfection, so this is meant to represent the entire history of the world, at least symbolically. We know that after the 1,000 years in the millennium, Satan will be loosed for a season, and then the final battle takes place, and then the world gets transformed into its celestial state. So I believe that these 1,000-year periods are general timelines and not specific dates to mark on a calendar. It's also interesting to note how many verses in the book of Revelation are attributed to each of these seals. For the first seal, there are 2 verses dedicated to it. 2 also for the second, third, and fourth seal. The 5th seal gets 3 verses. The 6th seal gets 23 verses. The rest of the book of Revelation deals with the 7th seal and everything that happens from the point Christ saves the Jews until the earth is celestialized. Now, I know there's also some verses and some chapters in there that go back in time a little bit and also talk about things premortally, but they're also symbolic of things that will happen in the future. So generally speaking, I believe that's the breakdown. So here is a timeline of all of the events that need to happen between now and the second coming and even beyond through the millennium. It's really not a timeline. It's really a sequence of events. This isn't meant to represent how long things take or what dates they will occur on, but rather the sequence or general order that these events need to take place between now and the second coming. I'll post a link to this online presentation where you can interact with it and learn more about the sequence of events and the different things that have to happen between now and the second coming and even after. You can click on any one of these events and learn more about it. There's usually some quotes, some scriptures, other videos on those particular topics, so you can learn about each one of these things in more depth. Some of the things that you're going to want to look at in particular, some of these final signs of the times and plagues that have to happen between now and the second coming. Some of the other things that you might be interested in is things like Mark of the Beast. Talked about that before. You can also see the times of the Gentiles, the return to Missouri, the 10 tribes, the temple being built in Jerusalem, and many other things. So this can help you, again, with the sequence of events and the general order that these things have to happen in. They're not meant to represent how long an event will take or the date that an event will take place on. Okay, now to which seal we are in. Let me assure you, we are in the 6th seal. Many of you listening will immediately scoff at that, but before you leave, give me a few minutes to explain why I firmly believe that we are still in the 6th seal. Let's start by looking at why so many are sure that we're in the 7th seal. I believe it comes down to a couple of things. The first is a general conference address in October 2001 by Gordon B. Hinckley, who was the prophet at the time. I love President Hinckley. We all have our favorite prophets, and Hinckley is among my very favorites. Every time he would shake his finger, I felt he was waving it at me. In the very first opening address of conference that year, he got right to the point and said, quote, The era in which we live is the fullness of time spoken of in the Scriptures, when God has brought together all of the elements of previous dispensations from the day that he and his beloved Son manifest themselves to the boy Joseph. There has been a tremendous cascade of enlightenment poured out upon the world. The hearts of men have turned to their fathers in fulfillment of the words of Malachi. The vision of Joel has been fulfilled. He then went on to quote the prophecy from Joel that he was referring to. And it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And old men shall dream dreams, and young men shall see visions, and also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my Spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance. And the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. This is important because according to the book of Revelation, the sun being turned to darkness and the moon being turned to blood are parts of the signs of the heavens that happen just before the half hour of silence that happens before the second coming. As you can see here in Revelation 8, Verse 1, it says, And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in the heavens for the space of half an hour. So if that prophecy has been fulfilled, with the sun being darkened and the moon turned to blood, that means we are in the half hour of silence and the second coming could be very near. This is all according to the book of Revelation. Some people even like to do the math of 1 day to the Lord is 1,000 years on the earth. And if so, a half hour is 20.8 years. And if President Hinckley said that that prophecy was already fulfilled in 2001, then using that math, the second coming would be around, well, now, at least as of this recording. But whether someone uses this math or not, there are a lot of problems with this interpretation. I'll explain President Hinckley's quote in a moment, but first, let's just look at this scripturally. If the events described by Joel and John in Revelation, with the sun being darkened and the moon turning to blood, have already happened, then there are a lot of other associated events that must have happened already as well. But there are many events that are supposed to happen before that which have not yet happened. But in all fairness to everyone, this is very complicated. There are many instances throughout Scripture that talk about this event, and it can be confusing about the sequence of events. For the purpose of my research, I focused on the following instances of the sun being darkened and the moon being turned to blood. Doctrine and Covenants 88, Joel 2, and again in Joel 3, Doctrine and Covenants 29, Revelation 6, and Doctrine and Covenants 45, all of which talk about this subject. As you can see, each of these references the sun being darkened and the moon turning to blood, although slightly different words are sometimes used. So now we need to determine the sequence of events around the signs in the heavens. First, many scriptures say that this event is before the great and terrible day of the Lord. I don't think anyone questions that. There are many events that seem to coincide with the sun and moon changing. A main one is that there's a mighty earthquake. Sometimes it is specifically called an earthquake, and other times it says that the earth shall tremble or shake. It also seems clear from many scriptures that when the scriptures say that there is a sign in the earth, earthquakes are one of those. Another corresponding event is the heavens shall tremble, which is the same as when the heavens are rolled up as a scroll or parted as a scroll. The stars falling or getting angry also happens as part of this same event. There is also fire, pillars, or vapors of smoke that are part of this event. As you can see, not every account has every element, and not all in the same order, but a careful reading makes me believe these are all happening at the same time. Now, because all of those are the same event, let's look at some of the other details in these accounts. Remember, if the sun and the moon event has already happened, then these are combined events, which is pretty clear that they are. Then any other associated events would also be in the past. However, notice a few details. The first is Revelation 6, verse 14. After describing the stars falling and the heavens departing as a scroll, it says, "And every mountain and island were moved out of their places." I think everyone would agree that this part of the prophecy hasn't happened yet. In fact, it is a verse like this that allows us to pull in other verses. For the sake of space, I'm going to remove a few of these and let's put in Revelation 16, verses 16 through 21. Notice the same prophecy about the islands fleeing and the mountains is here. In fact, all of these verses here are about the same event. Here it references the same earthquake, and look, a previous detail only found in one other account with the great hailstorm is now corroborated in these verses in Revelation 16. But now we get to a key detail in this account. These events happen right at the end of Armageddon. Now that we have tied these events to that of Armageddon, there are other verses that we can bring in here. I hope you are following me here. I couldn't think of a better way to do this visually. So let's get rid of these verses and let's add Revelation 11 verses 11 through 13 and Doctrine and Covenants 45 verses 47 and 48. Notice we have the same event again. Here is the great earthquake being described and the heavens shaking. Notice the words in Doctrine and Covenants 45, quote, "The arm of the Lord fall upon the nations." This is describing Armageddon. And then because we know this, we get additional details in Revelation 11, which is describing the death of the two witnesses that happens at the end of Armageddon, at the end of that 3.5-year period. And then again, after 3.5 days, they are resurrected and lifted up into heaven. John also is very specific about the timing of these events by saying that when the two witnesses are raised up, that in that same hour was the earthquake and all those other calamities that we saw in those other verses. Going back to Doctrine and Covenants 45, it tells us why and how all these things come about. "And then shall the Lord set his foot upon this mount, and it shall cleave in twain." This ties it all together. Let me summarize all of this. Armageddon begins and rages for 3.5 years. The two witnesses protect Jerusalem and the Jews during this time, but at the end of the 3.5 years, they are overtaken and are killed. After 3.5 days, the two witnesses are resurrected and taken up to heaven. Christ comes down right as the army is about to destroy the Jews, and then he touches his foot on the Mount of Olives. It splits in half. This destroys part of the army, and the rest flee out of fear. This same event unleashes all of the other calamities we described, including the great earthquake, the heavens rolling up as a scroll, the great hail, the islands flee and the mountains disappear, and yes, the sun is darkened and the moon is turned to blood. Then after all of these events, the seventh seal is opened, and there is silence in the heaven for half an hour. And guess what? None of this has happened yet. Now let me pause here because we are covering a lot of ground really fast. I would suggest diving into some of these specific topics more so you can understand them. I've done full videos on many of these individual topics, including Armageddon, the two witnesses, the great earthquake, and the plagues that come before the second coming. If you are really interested in understanding this further, please watch those. I'll put the links here. But all of that may not convince some, and I promise I'll come back to that Gordon B. Hinckley quote in a bit. Let's look at this from some other perspectives. It is those events of destruction that happen with the sun being darkened and the moon being turned to blood that destroy the city of Jerusalem, which prior to the second coming we know needs to be rebuilt, and the temple needs to be built there. The rebuilding of Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple happened during this half hour of silence in the heavens. If we are in the half hour of silence now, how does that work? Jerusalem hasn't been destroyed yet, and the temple hasn't been built. Again. Another perspective is that those calamities described with the sun darkening and the moon turning to blood include the earthquake and the heavens being rolled up like a scroll, and all that are some of the events that help terraform the earth into the terrestrial Garden of Eden for the millennium. Remember, when the seventh seal is opened and the silence in the heavens begin, that is technically the beginning of the millennium. If we are in the seventh seal and this is paradise, I don't know how I ended up on the South 40. Granted, much of that transition I believe will happen as a result of the wicked being burned at the second coming, but this is the second reason why people get really confused on this subject. Most everyone believes that when Christ comes back and saves the Jews and touches his foot on the Mount of Olives and all of that, most of us believe that is the second coming. While that is one of the appearances of Christ during the last days, that is not the main event or when he comes in glory. It is after the half hour of silence in the heavens that a great sign appears in heaven that we see all at once, and then he comes in glory with 10,000 angels. The morning of the first resurrection occurs, and the living righteous saints are lifted up to meet him. He then unveils his face, and the earth is consumed with fire, destroying the wicked. This is another subject that needs a lot of individual attention and explanation, so I did an entire video just on that subject. Here is the link. In essence, one of the main reasons most people get confused about whether we are in the sixth or the seventh seal is because they combine the return of Christ when he saves the Jews to his coming in glory. Ezra Taft Benson explains this very well in a 1982 New Era article. Now let's address that Gordon B. Hinckley quote, because I can explain all of this until I'm blue in the face, but when a prophet says something, it's hard to refute. And in fact, I'm not refuting it. I would like to have the opportunity to explain it further, and I wish that President Hinckley were here to confirm or deny my thoughts. But let's be clear, I don't think President Hinckley is wrong, but I do believe that we have taken his quote slightly out of context. If we look at each of these last days calamities, we find a general prophecy and then a specific big endgame prophecy. This is the foreshadowing that happens. Let me give you some examples. Let's read Matthew 24 verses 6 and 7, where the Lord tells of the calamities that will precede his second coming. He says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, for kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places." So he calls out wars and rumors of wars. Those are happening all around us all of the time, but that is different from the great and last war before the second coming, known as Armageddon. Earthquakes are happening all over and all of the time in diverse places, but that is very different than the last great earthquake prior to Christ's second coming. The same thing could be said of hailstorms happening all of the time versus the great hailstorm that the scriptures say will drop talent-sized hail. What about famine? There are places all over the earth suffering from famine right now, but that is different than the last great famine. As I make this video right now, waves are heaving over their bounds on the East Coast with a hurricane. Serious floods happened in Louisiana, southern Utah, and other places just last night. As I sit here right now, we are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, but that is sure to be different from the desolating scourge foretold in Scripture that is yet to come. As I record this, I look out to the west and I can't see the other side of the valley from the smoke from the California-Oregon fires. All of these have been spoken of and foretold and have come about. The prophecies about these general last days events are fulfilled, but those last great events that will put all others to shame have not yet been fulfilled. Look, if you don't believe me, that's fine, but here is a list of events that according to Scripture are supposed to happen prior to the second coming. This includes the time of the Gentiles that still need to be fulfilled. Watch my video on that if you aren't familiar with that subject. All missionaries need to be called home and stay home. No, COVID doesn't count. The mark of the beast has to still play out. Whatever the great scourge or plague or something major will begin upon my house. Then there's the persecution of the saints. Then something major, my guess is a major famine, needs to prepare Missouri for our return. The remaining faithful will return to Missouri and build Zion and a temple, probably a temple complex. Christ needs to appear in Zion, then Armageddon and the two witnesses in Jerusalem for 3.5 years, and then Christ saves the Jews. And no, this isn't the second coming, because after that, there is a half hour of silence. Then the Jews rebuild Jerusalem. The converted Jews build a temple and start performing authorized ordinances. The lost 10 tribes come to Zion. Then there is a major sign in the heavens that everyone sees at once. Then Christ comes in glory in the clouds with 10,000 holy angels, which coincides with the morning of the first resurrection, where all the righteous are lifted up as Christ unveils his face and the wicked are burned. And by the way, this isn't even the whole list. This is just the big events. Events associated with many of those, or have rationalized others in various ways. For example, I heard when COVID forced the return of some missionaries, they believed that was the fulfillment of that prophecy. Some people believe that vaccines are the mark of the beast. What some call persecutions of the saints happen somewhat regularly. Many say that Zion is now here where we live, and no one is required to go back to Missouri, or that at some point there will be a few people called back to Missouri. Some say that the temple in Zion doesn't need to be built right now, but sometime in the millennium, even though that isn't what Scripture says. I've heard others say that Christ's appearance in Kirtland fulfilled the prophecy we have been talking about. With Armageddon and the two witnesses, they think that can happen at any time and don't really correlate that with the half hour of silence. Many people think that the half hour of silence is now, even at the end of it, and think that we will announce a temple in Jerusalem very soon, or we will one day pitch a tent and dedicate it. And of course, this is just some of what people say. Ultimately, you have to decide what you believe. And listen, don't believe me, do your own research. But I hope people try to do it in an unbiased way. Those that believe the second coming is imminent can always find justification and rationale to fill the gaps that need to be filled. Just like when Gordon B. Hinckley says that the prophecy spoken by Joel has been fulfilled, there hasn't been a night this month that the sun hasn't been darkened and the moon looks eerily red due to the fires. That general prophecy has been fulfilled many times, just like President Hinckley said. But that is different from the singular event that happens when the Lord saves the Jews in Jerusalem from Armageddon, when the sun will be darkened and the moon turned to blood. That is yet to be fulfilled. President Hinckley wasn't wrong, but that doesn't mean the seventh seal has been opened. The confusion in this case was people taking that President Hinckley quote a bit out of context without considering all the other prophecies, and many people are confused about the appearances of Christ at the second coming, and the fact that when he appears to the Jews and saves them, that is not what we really consider the second coming, when he comes in glory, combined with the morning of the first resurrection and the burning of the wicked. Those are two separate events. Why does any of this matter? It matters because when people believe something about the gospel that isn't true, and then it is proven wrong, bad things can happen. Some people will think, well, if that isn't true, then none of it's true, and then they lose their testimony and leave the church. Others stay faithful, but use the same bad logic again and again, and get more people to believe them, and eventually some of those people lose their testimonies. Truth matters because when you hear truth, you feel the Spirit. The more truth you hear, the more the Spirit writes these things on the fleshy tables of your heart. Knowing truth strengthens your resolve to live a righteous life and lead others to the same thing. False doctrine and misunderstood scriptures and quotes can have the opposite effect. Like it says in Jeremiah 2, verse 13, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." We need to be very careful of both. Whether you believe me or not, perhaps this gives you an approach that you can take when studying yourself. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.